My name is Olivia Blackwood, and I always thought my family's wealth came from generations of smart real estate investments. That's what the plaque in our mansion's foyer proclaimed. Blackwood Properties, established 1892. That's what my parents told me at every family dinner. That's what everyone in our affluent circle believed. But they were all wrong. The truth began to unravel the day I decided to renovate our family mansion. At 32, I had finally convinced my parents to let me modernize the aging Victorian estate. They agreed reluctantly, with one strange condition: the basement was strictly off-limits. The foundation is delicate, my mother insisted, her usually confident voice wavering slightly. Any disturbance could compromise the entire structure. I should have noticed how her hands trembled when she said this, how my father's face turned ashen at the mere mention of renovation. But I was too excited about finally bringing the mansion into the 21st century to pay attention to these warning signs. The first few weeks of renovation went smoothly. We updated the kitchen, restored the grand staircase, and modernized the electrical systems. Everything was going according to plan until Marcus, my lead contractor, discovered something odd behind the wine cellar walls. "Miss Blackwood," he called one afternoon, his voice echoing through the empty halls. "You might want to see this." I followed him down to the wine cellar, where his team had been installing new temperature control systems. They had removed some of the old wooden panels, revealing something that made my blood run cold: a door. Not just any door, but a heavy iron door with an intricate locking mechanism, carefully hidden behind decades of careful carpentry. "This isn't on any of the building plans," Marcus said, shining his flashlight on the rusted hinges. "And look at this craftsmanship. This was built to last, to keep something in or out." I reached out to touch the cold metal, my fingers tracing the elaborate engravings on its surface. They formed a pattern I recognized, the same pattern that appeared on my great-grandfather's signet ring, the one my father still wore every day. "Can you open it?" I asked, my curiosity overshadowing the echo of my mother's warnings. Marcus examined the lock. "It's old, but not complicated. Give me a few minutes." The sound of his tools working on the lock seemed to grow louder in the confined space. Each click and scrape sent shivers down my spine. Finally, with a loud groan, the door swung open. The beam of Marcus's flashlight revealed a narrow corridor stretching into darkness. The air that rushed out was stale, carrying with it the musty smell of secrets long buried. "I'll go first," I said, taking the flashlight from Marcus's hand. "Wait here." The corridor was longer than I expected, its walls lined with shelves holding leather-bound ledgers and stacked papers. At the end stood a massive oak desk, its surface covered in dust, except for one spot, a fresh handprint. Someone had been here recently. My hands trembling, I picked up the nearest ledger. Its pages were filled with neat columns of numbers and names, dates stretching back to the 1890s. As I read, my eyes widened in horror. These weren't real estate transactions. They were something else entirely. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could turn, a familiar voice spoke. "I told you not to come down here, Olivia." I spun around to face my father, barely recognizing the man illuminated by my flashlight. His usually warm eyes were cold, his face set in grim determination. In his hand, he clutched a small key, the same key I had seen him wearing on a chain around his neck since I was a child. "Dad," I whispered, clutching the ledger to my chest. "What is all this?" He stepped forward, his shadow looming large on the corridor walls. "Put the book down, Olivia. Some secrets should stay buried." But it was too late. I had already seen enough to understand that everything I knew about my family was a lie. The Blackwood fortune wasn't built on real estate at all. It was built on something much darker, something that explained why certain families in our city had mysteriously disappeared over the years, why our basement was always off limits, and why my great-grandfather's portrait seemed to watch us with such sinister satisfaction. I took a step back, bumping into the old desk. "Dad, these records, these names. You don't understand," he said, advancing slowly. "Everything we did for the family, for our legacy." Behind him, I heard more footsteps. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face pale in the dim light. "Harrison," she called to my father, her voice urgent. "She needs to know. It's time." My father stopped, his shoulders sagging slightly. "She's not ready." "I wasn't ready either," my mother replied. "But the legacy must continue. And now that she's found this place," she gestured to the room full of dark secrets, "she needs to understand her inheritance." I looked between them, these people I thought I knew so well, suddenly strangers in the shadows of our family's true history. The ledger in my hands felt heavy with the weight of generations of secrets. And as my parents began to tell me the truth about the Blackwood legacy, I realized that the renovation of our old mansion had uncovered more than just hidden rooms and forgotten doorways. It had uncovered the dark foundation upon which our entire family fortune was built, a foundation that would soon force me to make an impossible choice between preserving my family's legacy and saving my own soul. The basement air grew colder as my parents led me deeper into the hidden corridor. My father's signet ring gleamed in the flashlight beam as he pulled out another leather-bound book from the shelves. "The Blackwood legacy began in 1892, he started, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before. "Your great-grandfather, Edmund Blackwood, wasn't just a real estate developer. He was what you might call a collector of debts." He opened the book, revealing pages of names, dates, and amounts. But these weren't ordinary loans. Each entry ended with the same chilling note: property acquired through complete forfeiture. "I don't understand," I said, though a horrible suspicion was beginning to form. My mother's hand touched my shoulder. "Edmund discovered something powerful during the economic crisis of the 1890s. People would do anything to save their homes, their businesses, their families. Anything." My voice trembled. "He offered them contracts," my father continued. "Magical contracts, bound by blood and ancient rituals. They would receive whatever they desperately needed: money, power, success. In return, they pledged something far more valuable than mere property: their souls." I whispered, the words feeling ridiculous even as they left my mouth. But my parents didn't laugh. "Not exactly," my mother said. "Their fate, their future, everything they could or would become. When the contract came due, they simply disappeared. Their properties, their wealth, everything transferred to the Blackwood family." I stared at the ledger, understanding now why certain names seemed familiar. They were prominent families who had mysteriously vanished over the years, their disappearances written off as accidents or unexplained tragedies. "The contracts," my father explained, "were designed by Edmund using knowledge he gained from certain entities, beings that exist in the spaces between what's real and what's not. They ensure the terms are met, one way or another." My mother pulled out another book, this one newer. The business evolved over time. We became more selective, more discreet. Instead of targeting desperate families, we focused on ambitious individuals, people who would trade anything for success. Like the Harritons last year. I remembered suddenly. They won the state lottery, became overnight millionaires. Then their private plane crashed 6 months later. They knew the terms, my father said coldly. 6 months of wealth and success, then complete forfeiture. Everything they gained, everything they were, became part of the Blackwood fortune. This is insane. I backed away from them. You're telling me our entire family fortune is built on stealing people's lives? Their futures? Building, my mother corrected. Present tense. The contracts are still active. In fact, she hesitated, glancing at my father. There's one being negotiated right now. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, my contractor. Miss Blackwood, there's someone here to see you about the renovation budget. Says it's urgent. My blood ran cold. The renovation costs, I said slowly. They're higher than expected. You knew I'd need more funding. My father nodded. We arranged for someone to offer help. Someone desperate enough to sign a new contract. No, I shook my head. I won't be part of this. You already are, my mother said firmly. You're Blackwood. The legacy passes to you now. You must learn to manage the contracts, to maintain the family business. And if I refuse, my father's expression darkened. You can't. The moment you entered this room, you became bound to the legacy. The entities that enforce our contracts. They're aware of you now. I looked around the room, suddenly feeling watched by something beyond the shadows. The air seemed to thicken, and in the corners of my vision, I caught glimpses of movement that shouldn't be possible. There's more, my mother added. The contracts require active management. If the Blackwood line fails to maintain them, she shuddered. Let's just say the entities would claim everything, including us. I sank into the old desk chair, my mind reeling. How many? I asked. How many active contracts are there? My father pulled out a modern laptop, incongruous in this ancient space. Currently, 47, each with different terms, different due dates. They need to be monitored, managed. New ones need to be created to maintain the balance. The contractor upstairs, I realized. He would be number 48. If you approve the contract, my mother nodded. It's your decision now. Your first test as the new keeper of the Blackwood legacy. My phone buzzed again. Marcus, Miss Blackwood? He's getting impatient. I stared at the message, understanding now that I stood at a crossroads. I could run, try to escape this dark inheritance, but my parents' warnings about the consequences rang in my ears. Or I could embrace it, become what generations of Blackwoods had been, collectors of fates, dealers in futures. Standing up, I straightened my jacket and took a deep breath. I need to see all the contracts, every detail. If I'm going to be responsible for this, I need to understand everything. My parents exchanged relieved looks. Of course, my father said, moving toward a modern filing cabinet hidden in the shadows. But first, you need to deal with the situation upstairs. I walked toward the door, then paused. Just tell me one thing. When you paid for my college education, for my first apartment, for everything, whose fate paid for it? The silence that followed was deafening. The Middletons, my mother finally answered. Remember them? The family that owned the bakery downtown. I did remember. They had vanished during my freshman year of college. Their bakery, their home, everything they owned had been mysteriously abandoned overnight. As I climbed the stairs back to the main house, each step felt heavier than the last. Upstairs, a desperate person waited, ready to trade their future for immediate success. and I had to decide whether to continue my family's dark legacy or find another way, if another way even existed. What I didn't know then was that my decision would set in motion a chain of events that would either secure the Blackwood fortune forever or destroy everything my family had built over the past century. I pushed open the basement door, stepping back into the world of light and normalcy. But now I understood. Our mansion wasn't just a symbol of wealth and success. It was a repository of stolen fates, a fortress built on disappeared lives. And I was its new keeper. Marcus waited in the grand foyer, standing next to a man I'd never seen before. The stranger wore an ill-fitting suit and clutched a worn briefcase. Samuel Thompson, according to the contract papers my father had slipped into my hand before I came upstairs. Miss Blackwood, Marcus nodded. Mr. Thompson here has an interesting proposition about funding the renovation. I studied Thompson carefully. Middle-aged, desperate eyes, wedding ring. A man with a family, with a future my family's legacy would erase. Let's talk in the study, I said, leading them away from the basement door. The study walls were lined with photographs, generations of Blackwoods standing proudly in front of their various properties. Now, I understood why none of the pictures included the previous owners. I understand you're having financial difficulties with the renovation, Thompson began, his voice trembling slightly. I represent certain investors who could help. I opened the contract my father had prepared. The terms were clear. Thompson would receive $5 million, enough to save his failing business and put his kids through college. In return, he and his entire family would forfeit their future existence in exactly 3 years. My hand shook as I placed the contract on the desk. One signature, and I would become just like my parents, like my grandfather, like all the Blackwoods before them, a collector of souls, a trader of fates. Mr. Thompson, I said slowly, before we discuss terms, I need to show you something. I led him back to the basement, ignoring my parents' shocked expressions when we entered the hidden room. Thompson's eyes widened as he took in the shelves of ledgers, the ancient desk, the feeling of otherworldly presence that permeated the space. What is this place? This, I said, pulling out the most recent ledger, is where we keep the real contracts. The ones that explain exactly what happens to people who make deals with my family. My father stepped forward. Olivia, stop this immediately. But I continued, showing Thompson the entries. The Harringtons, the Middletons, dozens of families who had vanished after signing away their futures. The money you're being offered isn't just money. It's lives, futures, stolen from people like you who were desperate enough to sign without understanding the true cost. The air in the room grew colder. In the corners of my vision, shadows moved in impossible ways. I felt them watching, waiting, those entities my father had mentioned. Olivia, my mother's voice was sharp with warning. You're endangering everything. No, I stood my ground. I'm ending everything. I turned to Thompson, who had gone pale. Go home to your family. Whatever trouble you're in, it's better than the alternative. Trust me. After Thompson flowed, I faced my parents. The ledgers began to vibrate on their shelves. Dark shapes coalesced in the shadows. Do you have any idea what you've done? My father's voice shook with rage and fear. The contracts must continue. The entities require regular tributes. Without new contracts, they'll take everything, my mother finished, including us. It's how the original deal was structured. The entities get everything if the Blackwood line fails to maintain the cycle. I picked up the oldest ledger, my great-grandfather's first record of deals and forfeitures. Then let them take it. The shadows in the room solidified into forms that hurt my eyes to look at. The temperature dropped to freezing. I found something else in these records, I continued, opening the book to a marked page. A clause in the original agreement. The entities can be bound and banished if someone of Blackwood blood willingly sacrifices the entire fortune. Everything gained through the contracts, freely given up. My parents lunged forward, but it was too late. I had already begun the words written in the margin of that first ledger, my great-grandfather's contingency plan that no Blackwood had ever been willing to use. The entities swirled around us, their presence becoming more solid with each word I spoke. The fortune my family had accumulated over generations, properties, money, stolen futures, began to dissolve. I felt it leaving, my trust fund, my apartments, everything I owned that had been bought with Blackwood money. More importantly, I felt the contracts breaking. Somewhere, the Harritons were returning to existence. The Middletons were reclaiming their stolen futures. My parents screamed as their own wealth evaporated. The mansion itself began to fade, decades of stolen prosperity returning to their rightful owners. When it was over, we stood in an empty basement. No hidden room, no ancient desk, no ledgers full of dark contracts. Just concrete walls and the remnants of what had once been the Blackwood fortune. "What have you done?" my father whispered, looking at his empty hands. His signet ring had vanished with everything else. "I chose a different legacy," I answered. "One we can build ourselves without stealing other people's futures." My mother sank to the floor, her designer clothes replaced by simple garments. "We're nothing now." "No one." "No," I helped her up. "We're finally freed to be something real." Upstairs, Marcus and his renovation crew had vanished. The contract that brought them here no longer existed. The mansion was just a house now, old but ordinary. No more hidden rooms, no more dark secrets. I walked out the front door, where my car had been replaced by a modest used model, the last vestige of my previous life transformed into something honestly earned. The sun was setting over what had once been the Blackwood estate. Tomorrow, I would wake up just like everyone else, without wealth or privilege, but also without the weight of generations of stolen fates. I pulled out my phone and deleted the name Blackwood Properties from my contacts. It was time to build something new, something clean. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The mansion seemed smaller now, just another old house with history, but no more dark secrets. The entities were gone, the contracts broken, the futures returned. The Blackwood legacy was over, but mine was just beginning. 10 years later, I stood in front of a different building, the headquarters of New Horizons Development, my new company, built from scratch, with honest work and legitimate contracts. No hidden rooms, no stolen futures. My parents eventually adapted to normal life. My father found work as a real estate agent, dealing in actual properties instead of supernatural contracts. My mother started a small interior design business. We weren't wealthy anymore, but we were real. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream about that hidden room and the entities that dwelled there. But then I wake up and look at what I've built, a life that's truly mine, a success that didn't cost anyone else their future. The plaque on my office wall reads, "Founded 2023, a new legacy, started by choice rather than inheritance." And in my desk drawer, I keep one thing from that old basement, a blank page from my great-grandfather's ledger, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable thing you can inherit is the chance to choose a different path. The Blackwood fortune may be gone, but in its place, something better grew, A family that finally learned the true meaning of building a legacy, one that doesn't require stealing someone else's future to secure your own.